tackle how to master anything faster, the science and strategy of rapid learning. So our mission today is pretty clear. Unpack the best science-backed methods, the really practical tools for mastering stuff faster. We want to boil it down to what truly works so you can, completely change how you approach learning pretty much anything new.
Yeah, and what's really great, what the source material really drives home, is that mastery isn't some like mystical talent you're either born with or you're not. It's not about having a gift. It's actually a predictable result. It comes from consistently using proven strategies. And these strategies are really fine-tuned to how our brains actually learn best, which, means it's something anyone can tap into, really.
Okay, so if mastery is where we want to get, the first step, it seems like it's not just about running fast, right? It's about knowing where you're going and why. So the source asks this really critical first question. What does mastery actually mean to you? Like specifically, are you trying to be, I don't know, the best in the world, maybe something competitive? Or is it more like just being good enough for day-to-day use, a new skill for work or a hobby you just want to enjoy? Maybe it's simpler, like passing an exam or building a portfolio you can show people, or maybe even wowing an audience with something new you've learned.
Getting that clear is absolutely fundamental.
Yeah.
There's this pro tip in the source. It basically says, the clearer your definition of success is, the quicker your brain kind of locks onto the best path to get there. Think about it. If the target's fuzzy, your brain's just like scattering its efforts, right? It's inefficient. But when you define mastery really precisely, your brain starts building these super efficient pathways. It automatically starts ignoring the irrelevant stuff and focusing your energy. And that saves just immense amounts of wasted time and effort down the line.
Right. Okay, so you get that laser focus on your target. Then what? The source brings up this really powerful idea, the 80-20 rule, the Pareto principle, this idea that, kind of surprisingly, like 80% of the results you want, they often come from just 20% of what you actually do. So the challenge for you, the listener, is figuring out what is that high impact 20%?
Exactly. And the source gives some great examples to make it concrete, like learning a language. The 80-20 might mean focusing super hard on the top 500, maybe 1,000 most common words. That small chunk unlocks a huge amount of everyday conversation, way faster than trying to memorize the entire dictionary or public speaking. You prioritize body language, your tone of voice, maybe telling good stories, rather than just agonizing over memorizing a script word for word. And with music, mastering the core scales, the common chord progressions first. That makes you competent much quicker than getting totally bogged down in obscure music theory right at the start. There's a great hack suggested too. Keep asking yourself, if I only had time to practice one thing today, what's the single thing that would give me the biggest leap forward towards my specific goal?
That's a brilliant question for cutting through the noise. But, what's the biggest hurdle people face when they try to stick to that vital 20%? It feels weird to ignore things that seem useful, right?
Oh, it absolutely does. That's a great point. It feels very counterintuitive. I think the biggest barrier is often maybe FOMO, fear of missing out, or this mistaken belief that just doing more in every area automatically leads to better results. Our brain's kind of like ticking boxes, right? Completion. So skipping things feels wrong. But the 80-20 is all about strategic neglect, really. It takes discipline to say no to the things that are just good so you can focus on what's great. You have to trust that zeroing in on that core 20% is the fastest route.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so we know what mastery looks like for us. We know roughly where to focus. Now, how do we actually get our brains firing on all cylinders? Because just, passively absorbing info, that seems to be a major pitfall, doesn't it? It's so easy to feel productive watching endless tutorials or reading book after book, but the source calls this a trap.
It definitely can be a trap. Yeah, the fastest learning, the kind that really sticks. It doesn't happen when you're just like consuming information. It happens when you're actively doing something with it, becoming a creator. So active learning, that means things like trying to teach someone else what you've just learned. That forces you to really solidify it, find gaps in your own head.
Right.
Or solving actual problems, working through case studies, maybe even creating your own version of whatever it is you studied. Like the example they give, learning graphic design. Don't just watch the tutorial. Pause it. Open the software. Try to recreate it from memory or apply that technique to a little project of your own. That's when your brain is really building and strengthening those connections.
And speaking of building connections, we've all done it, right? Cramming for a test, feeling like you nailed it, then a week later, poof, it's gone. The source talks about spaced repetition as the antidote to this.
Yes. And the science behind it is really cool. Spaced repetition. It's basically a system that nudges you to recall information right around the time your brain is naturally starting to forget it. It works with something called the forgetting curve. You know, how memory naturally fades. By strategically reminding yourself at increasing intervals, you're signaling to your brain, hey, this stuff is important. Keep it.
Gotcha.
It builds much stronger, much more durable memories. You can use tools like Anki, Quizlet, or honestly, even just a well-organized notebook can work.
Okay.
The best strategy seems to be studying a bit every day, then reviewing after, say, 1 day, then maybe 3 days later, then 7 days. Those gaps get intentionally longer. Less effort for better recall, essentially.
That really shows how our brains work, doesn't it? So for someone listening, maybe feeling a bit daunted by tracking all these intervals, what's the absolute simplest way to just dip a toe into spaced repetition?
Simplest way. Honestly, maybe just use physical flashcards for a really small set of information you want to remember. Review them all today. Tomorrow, just look at the ones you struggled with. Day after, if you still remember them, maybe skip a day before looking again. It doesn't need to be this complex, perfect system from the get-go. Just start small, be consistent, and gradually stretch those review times out as things stick.
Got it. Start simple. Okay, and then there's this term deliberate practice, coined by Anders Ericsson. This isn't just the old practice makes perfect idea, is it? It's something more specific. What's the main thing people get wrong about practice that deliberate practice corrects?
That's a really key distinction, yeah. The biggest mistake is thinking that just putting in the hours, just repeating something over and over is enough. That kind of repetition builds familiarity, sure, but you often hit a plateau pretty quickly. Deliberate practices, well, deliberate. It's highly focused. It means breaking this skill down into tiny sub-skills, then practicing each of those sub-skills with intense concentration. Crucially, you have to be actively looking for feedback, finding out immediately how you did.
Okay.
Then you use that feedback to refine what you're doing, and you repeat that specific targeted process. The source uses a music example, which is great. Don't just mindlessly play the whole song again and again. Instead, you identify that one really tricky bar, that chord change you always mess up, and you drill just that specific part intensely until it's smooth. Then you put it back into the context of the song. It's a very focused effort.
That makes total sense. A focused effort, not just repetition. Okay, shifting gears slightly. Optimizing your environment and your mindset. The source makes this really powerful point. You don't necessarily need like 10 hours a day. What you really need is maybe 2-3 hours of truly deep, distraction-free work. They even say 1 hour of deep focus can beat 5 hours of scattered effort. What's actually going on in the brain during that deep work that makes it so effective? Is it just about shutting off notifications?
It's definitely more than just turning off your phone, although that's a huge part of it. During deep work, your brain gets into this state, sometimes called flow, where it can build and strengthen these really specific neural connections related to this skill. When you're constantly multitasking, switching between things, getting interrupted, your prefrontal cortex, the brain's CEO basically, is constantly shifting gears.
Right.
And every single switch costs you cognitive energy and time. It's called context switching cost. In deep work, you eliminate that cost. All your mental resources are aimed squarely at the task. The source suggests things like the Pomodoro technique, 25 minutes on, 5 minutes off, or maybe longer blocks, 50 minutes on, 10 off. But the key during those on times is zero tolerance for distractions. Notifications off, phone maybe in another room entirely, no multitasking. And yeah, that insight holds up. 1 hour of that truly deep focused practice really can be more valuable than 5 hours of just being busy and distracted. Your brain's working way more efficiently.
Wow. Okay, that's a game changer. And then there's this other technique, the Feynman technique, based on the idea that if you can explain something simply, like to a kid, you really get it. How does that force us past just kind of surface level memorization?
It's such a brilliant technique for exactly that reason. You start by learning a concept. Then, step 2, you pretend you have to teach it to someone who knows absolutely nothing about it. Like, literally imagine explaining it to a 5-year-old using simple language. As you try to do that, you inevitably hit points where suddenly your explanation gets fuzzy, or you realize you're just using jargon without really understanding what's underneath it, or you just plain get stuck. That's the crucial moment. You identify exactly where your understanding broke down. Then you go back to your notes or the book or whatever, and you shore up that specific weak spot. You simplify your explanation even further, and you try teaching it again. It's this cycle. Explain, find the gap, review, simplify, explain again. It forces your brain to build really solid, interconnected understanding, not just isolated facts you've memorized. You simply can't simplify something well if you don't understand it deeply.
So true. Yeah, you can't fake the simple explanation. Okay, and this leads nicely into tracking the old saying, what gets measured gets improved.
Exactly. That maxim really sets up why tracking and reflection are so important. The source suggests tracking a few key things. How much time did you actually spend? What specifically did you practice? Which sub-skills? What felt like an improvement? And, maybe most importantly, what still feels confusing or difficult. And then critically, take just 5 minutes, maybe at the end of the week, and ask yourself those key reflection questions. What worked well this week? What didn't work so well? And based on that, what am I going to do differently next week? It sounds simple, but keeping some kind of learning journal like this. The source says it's incredibly powerful for motivation, for accountability, and for spotting those blind spots in how you're learning that you might otherwise miss.
I like that. It feels manageable. Okay, next strategy. This one feels really empowering because it's like you don't have to figure everything out from scratch. Model the masters. Basically, find people who've already nailed the skill you want to learn and study them.
Yes, and the key is how you model them effectively. It's not just about admiring them from afar. It's about really detailed observation and emulation, watching how they tackle problems, analyzing their routines, their practice habits. If you can, ask them questions, read their blogs, watch interviews, study their books or courses. You're essentially trying to reverse engineer their success.
Right.
The core idea is simple and powerful. Success leaves clues. Why stumble through every possible mistake yourself when you can learn from the paths others have already cleared?
Yeah, learn from their clues. But you're still going to stumble, right? Mistakes are inevitable. And the source has this great reframe. Mistakes aren't setbacks. They're actually valuable data. It even says if you're not failing sometimes, you're probably not pushing yourself hard enough.
That is such a crucial mindset shift. Instead of seeing a mistake and thinking, oh no, I failed, you train yourself to think, okay, interesting data point. What can I learn here? The source gives concrete questions to ask yourself right away. What did this mistake teach me? Okay, what can I try differently next time? And even, was there any part of that attempt that actually was a success, even if the final result wasn't perfect? When you hit a wall, figure out why and adjust. Your brain is literally rewiring itself. Plasticity, right? It's strengthening connections, building resilience. Every time you kind of metaphorically fall down and get back up with new information, your brain gets stronger, more adaptable. It learns how to learn.
That reframing is so powerful. Okay, and as a sort of bonus tip, the source reminds us not to underestimate our environment.
Yeah, the bonus. Stack the right environment idea. It covers a few things, like intentionally surrounding yourself with people who support you, maybe even push you a little. Using tools, apps, websites, whatever, that make the learning process more engaging, maybe even fun. And consciously creating a physical space, or even a digital one, that minimizes those distractions we talked about earlier. A good environment doesn't just remove friction. It can actually make the hard work feel, well, less hard. Think about using music or specific apps or even just visual cues in your workspace to keep you focused and excited about what you're learning.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so wrapping this all up, what's the big takeaway for you listening right now? It seems incredibly clear from the source. Mastery isn't really about having some genius-level IQ or grinding out a mythical 10,000 hours just for the sake of it. It really hinges on having clear goals, using a smart, deliberate strategy, showing up consistently day after day, and crucially, being willing to embrace challenges, view failures as data, and just grow from them.
Exactly. I love the line, essentially, that every expert you look up to, they all started as beginners, every single one. The difference wasn't just talent. It was that they kept showing up just a little smarter every time. They learned how to learn.
Love that. Okay, so here's a final thought, something for you to chew on. How might defining a personal mastery goal for something small, maybe even an everyday task, like, I don't know, consistently brewing the perfect cup of coffee every morning, or finally getting your digital files organized, or perfecting one specific recipe. How might applying these principles to something small like that change how you approach learning bigger things? Could it make the whole process feel less like a chore and more like this cool, deliberate experiment in your own life? Something to think about. Pick a skill, any skill, commit to this process, and get ready to learn like maybe you never have before.